Accused of a crime I did not commit, I seek to rehabilitate my good name and catch the real killers here on The Daniel Natal Show. In 1841, Friedrich List, the leading German economist in the mid-19th century, argued that it was in the nature of more developed countries to kick away the ladder with which they climbed to the top, and so deny poorer countries the chance to develop. He wrote, "It is a very common clever device that when anyone has attained the summit of greatness, he kicks away the ladder by which he has climbed up, in order to deprive others of the means of climbing up after him." List was an economist, so he was thinking in terms of countries, such as today, for instance, when neoliberal economic conmen tell small developing nations that free trade is the way to go, and they usually parrot things like David Ricardo's theory of competitive advantage. Don't make your own products, they're advised. Don't build up your own industrial base. Just trade for things from the United States. If you're good at cocoa, then just make cocoa. But get your shoes, computers, ovens, and cars from America. You have a competitive advantage in just making cocoa, so stick to cocoa. Stay in your lane. The only problem with the concept of competitive advantage is that it keeps countries poor.
This is two countries, Ghana and Thailand. They start in 1962 with very similar levels of income. So let's look at what these countries knew how to do in 1962. Well, you see the colors are fairly similar. There they were doing cocoa, here they were doing rice and rubber, but essentially very similar productive patterns. Let's look at what happened in the intervening period. Ghana diversified a little bit, see more or less similar colors, they added gold. And Thailand completely transformed what they did. Thailand suddenly, the old stuff is this thing here and there, but they suddenly are making electronics, cars, trucks, chemicals, a bunch of other stuff that was not there before. Incomes in the two countries diverged so that now Thailand is 4.5 times richer than Ghana. You have heard, repeated many times, that countries should specialize in their areas of comparative advantage. That's probably one of the most dangerous statements that has been ever said, okay? In the process of growth, countries don't specialize. Countries diversify. They add more things, they become good at more things.
Most Americans don't know that one of the precipitating factors for the Revolutionary War was England's insistence on what they called free trade. England had industrialized. They were making tons of money in the new high-tech industry of manufacturing. To feed that industry, they had their colonies making the raw materials from which they would make their finished products. The Americans were noticing that the new factories in England were generating vastly more money than the old plantations from the feudal age. They wanted to ditch the slave model and industrialize like England. England, needless to say, didn't want the competition. They wanted America to remain agrarian and poor. Just produce cotton and tobacco and leave all the high-tech stuff to England. The Americans chafed at this and tried to industrialize, but the British raced to stop it. In 1770, William Pitt said in Parliament that the New England colonies should not be permitted to manufacture so much as a horseshoe nail. In fact, the British created the Navigation Acts to prevent any metal or machinery going to America that could be used to make factories. The Americans smelled a rat. They staged a revolution. They industrialized and became the richest country in human history. Later, during the American Civil War, Great Britain complained that the Americans weren't being sufficiently mindful of free trade. What the British left out was that under their largest period of growth, from 1720 to 1850, Great Britain subscribed to protectionist policies. Its tariff rate on manufactured imports from 1820, for instance, were 45 to 55%. To put this in context, the tariffs in the Netherlands were 6 to 8%, in Germany 8 to 12%, in France 20%. So Britain got rich by being protectionist and defending their own industries, while telling America not to. Later on, to their discredit, America kind of morphed into the British Empire. After they became the global hegemons, they did what the British had earlier done and went around the world keeping developing countries poor with the gospel of competitive advantage. Don't make things. Don't develop your own economies. Just rely on free trade.
That's essentially how the third world and the first world divided. You take a look at the countries that developed. They're the countries who violated the principles. England, the United States, Germany, France, the Netherlands. One country of the South, one country developed, Japan, the one country that wasn't colonized and was able to pursue the same course that the rich countries developed.
What the US isn't telling these little countries is that the United States experienced its greatest economic expansion from the 1830s to the 1940s with markedly protectionist policies. South Korean economist Ha-Joon Chang, in his book, Bad Samaritans, points out that before competitive advantage, countries in South America had a 3% annual growth rate. After they took America's advice and subscribed to free trade, their growth rate plummeted to 1%. Chang's own country of South Korea had the same GDP as Haiti in 1960. Haiti followed the gospel of free trade and stayed poor. South Korea, by contrast, expanded their economy, built up their industries, and became one of the world's great economic success stories. Unlike so many other small countries, they manifested skepticism when America tried to kick the ladder out from behind them. They caught on to the do as I say, not as I do scam and took America's advice with a grain of salt, kind of like modern people would treat Bernard Baruch. In the words of historian Anthony Sutton in his Wall Street and FDR, Bernard Baruch was probably the most prestigious Wall Streeter of all time, perhaps even exceeding in influence both Morgan and Rockefeller. Baruch offers an insight into how the latter was kicked away from current investors after regulation was used to consolidate power for the elite class. In his autobiography, My Own Story, Baruch writes, "Rather often I am asked why it is that we do not have present-day equivalents to the financial giants who dominated Wall Street at the turn of the century. Is it that Americans have recently become a new and softer breed? Part of the answer, of course, is that today's stock market is drastically different than it was in the days of Morgan Rockefeller, Edward H. Harriman, and others. Government regulation has made illegal many of the practices engaged in even as late as 1929. That kind of trading I did for Thomas Ryan in his tobacco war with James Duke would not be possible today, nor what I had done with amalgamated copper." In his write-up on J.P. Morgan's right-hand man, James R. Keene, Baruch writes, "If there was ever a true wizard of Wall Street, he was James R. Keene. No one I ever knew approached him in his skill at operating in the market. His masterpiece of market making was in U.S. Steel, which he handled at Morgan's behest. I might add that under the SEC's regulations, Keene's methods in making a market are no longer permitted." Long story short, after the super-rich made their fortunes engaging in certain practices like insider trading, they created the SEC to prevent you from being able to follow in their footsteps. In other words, they kicked away the ladder. In our next video, following the same theme, we'll see how the elite kick away the ladder in another way, namely, telling you that single motherhood and broken homes are awesome, while they have the highest rates of intact families to derive all the advantages that a nuclear family has. So while they pitch progressive postmodernist values to you, they lead vastly more conservative lives than the general public, but do so quietly, secretly, all in the interests of kicking away the ladder. People fear any political leader who has his finger on the red button. What political leaders fear is people having their finger on the red button, the subscribe button. Push it and see their narratives explode. Also consider donating to help keep these videos coming. And don't forget our website and newsletter, thenewamerican.com.